Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Houston Sports Back into the video. Today, the Minnesota Vikings have ended up releasing running back Alexander Mattison, who just for the Vikings just went into his first year as the starting running back. After Dalvin Cook was cut, Mattison became the starter. It looked like they were going to trust him quite a bit going into the season, and it looked like he had some promise too, but he played 16 games with 13 starts and only had 700 rushing yards, which isn't terrible, but he averaged per carry, he had 3.9 rushing yards per carry, which wasn't terrible, but wasn't great. He averaged only 43.8 rushing yards per game. It was a passing offense, so I guess that's not bad. And he also had 30 receptions for 192 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. So he wasn't terrible. But I also want to compare him to Ty Chandler. Ty Chandler is someone who started the last 4 games for the Minnesota Vikings. He ended up playing 17 games on the season, but he started the last 4 games. And those were the 4 games that Mattison didn't start because he only started 13 games. And in those 4 games he started, he had 461 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. He also had 21 receptions for 159 receiving yards. So you compare Mattison and Chandler. Mattison had 700 rushing yards in 13 starts, while in 4 starts for Chandler, he had 461 with 3 touchdowns, while Mattison in 13 starts had 0 rushing touchdowns. Chandler had 3. Now, receiving stats. Let's go to receiving stats. Chandler had a total of 159 receiving yards and 0 touchdowns, while Alexander Mattison had 192 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, keep in mind, Mattison is the player who started 9 more games. So, yes, Mattison's stats, he beats Chandler in all the stats, or not all of them, but most of them. But also not forgetting, Mattison did start 9 more games than Chandler did. I thought Ty Chandler did a really good job at the end of the season. Now, I think there's a lot of things that we can talk about with what the Vikings are going to do this offseason, but I want to kind of go over what I think the Vikings should do at the running back position this offseason. I think with the amount of talent they have on the receiving end, the running back position isn't that important for this Vikings offense. If you have a good quarterback to throw the ball to, guys like Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne, hopefully TJ Hawkinson could make a return at some point, probably midway through the season, once they get him back. I mean, that was a terrible injury, so I'm not going to say he's going to come back to what he was before, but hopefully he would. But, you got those 3 wide receivers. You have the 3 wide receivers who are excellent, and then you have your tight end, but who knows when he's going to be back and what he'll look like when he gets back. But prayers to TJ Hawkinson. What should you do at the running back position? I keep Ty Chandler for 1. I don't know if he's a free agent or not. I didn't think to look that up before starting this video, which I should have. But if he's a free agent, re-sign him. But Ty Chandler needs to be in the plans for the Minnesota Vikings next season. Like I said, I really like Ty Chandler, and I like what he did, but I wouldn't go ahead and make him that permanent running back 1. I go in the draft. If I'm the Vikings, I go to the draft, and I get a running back in the draft. And I like a guy from Michigan, and that's Blake Corum from Michigan. I really love him. He has a lot of speed. He's versatile. I think he'd be a really, really good running back for the Vikings to have. Obviously, they're not going to run the ball a lot, but he has speed, and I think that, look, you got one of the fastest guys out there in Justin Jefferson. I think Blake Corum and Justin Jefferson, having those 2 guys on the team, it'd be great. And he reminds me a lot like Kyron Williams. And I'm not talking about the way they run the ball. I think there are some similarities, but they just remind me about. I think some people wherever Corum ends up, I think he's gonna have. I think he can. Why I say the Kyron Williams comparison is because I think Corum, wherever he ends up, can have the type of impact that Kyron Williams had with the Los Angeles Rams. Outside of Kyron Williams, the running backs in this past year's draft weren't that great. I mean, you had Kyron Williams, you had a couple other solid running backs, but I think Corum could make that type of impact. We saw how good he was for Michigan. We saw how good he was in the national championship. If I were the Vikings, I'd draft him. Now, the complicated thing is the Vikings don't have a third-round pick. The Lions have their third-round pick because of that T.J. Hawkinson trade. Funny enough, T.J. Hawkinson mentioned again. They have the 42nd overall pick. They have the 11th overall pick. Mock drafts have Corum going late 60s, early mid 70s. So obviously you're not going to use Corum without either one of those picks. So if I were the Vikings, here is what I would do. I would trade down, actually, at that second round pick, that number 42. I trade down. I would trade down to the 60s. You can get yourself another pick. So let's say you trade down from 42. I'm just throwing out a random number. I'm not thinking about a team. Let's say you trade down to 42 to 61. Just throwing that random number out. The Vikings would probably get another draft pick, like maybe a 5th round pick or a 4th round pick, possibly. Just saying that. That would probably be the other pick. They're going to get another pick for a team jumping up that kind of spots, that amount of spots. You'd probably be able to get a 4th round pick or a future draft pick with, the draft pick you were getting to trade down to get Blake Corum. So you trade down to the 60s around there, which is it's a far trade down because you are going all the way about 20 spots, but and that's also saying that Blake Corum doesn't, his draft stock doesn't rise. I don't think it's gonna be like that. I think if you go to the number I said, 61 or 62, or I think really anything in the early 60s, 61, 60, 62, 63, I think, maybe even 64, 65, I think you're safe to land Blake Corum. I think you can maybe even go to the late 60s and you still will probably be able to select him if that's who they'd be interested in. But if I were the Vikings, that's what I would do. I'd have Ty Chandler and Blake Corum in the backfield next season for the Minnesota Vikings. And for a team who doesn't run the football that much and they love to pass the ball, it's funny enough, we don't know who's going to be their quarterback to do that, but for a team that passes the ball a lot, I think that's a really good running back to have for a first pass offense in Blake Corum and Ty Chandler. But that's after releasing Alexander Mattison, who wasn't that great for Minnesota. He also had some fumbling issues too. That's another thing. That was a big problem. Turned the ball over too. Forgot to mention that. But after getting rid of him, if I was the Vikings, I would re-sign or just keep Chandler, whether he's a free agent or not, and then draft. Find a way to get Blake Corum in the draft. Let me know your thoughts on the roster move for the Vikings in the comment section, and peace out.